The plains, its wide porch facing miles of broken grass and forgotten trails. Night came early out here, slipping over the land like a quiet hand closing a door. Inside, the fire burned steady, throwing warm light across polished wood, leather chairs, and shelves lined with old books that had crossed deserts and rivers to end up here. Wealth showed in the walls and the furniture, but loneliness sat heavier than gold. The cowboy rested deep in a wide chair near the hearth, his hat set aside, his boots dusty from the day. Folks in the old west town spoke his name with care. They said he owned more land than he could ride in a week. They said he had buried more than one dream out on those plains. His face was strong and weathered, dark beard trimmed short, eyes often distant as if still watching some past horizon. Tonight, those eyes were closed, his breathing slow, his body still. Or so it seemed. He had learned long ago that silence told more truth than words. The frontier taught that lesson early. Horses told their worries with a twitch of the ear. Men told lies with easy talk. And people showed their hearts when they believed no one was watching. From the far end of the room, the maid paused. She moved carefully as if sound itself might break something fragile. She had come to this house from a broken path, her past marked by hard work and softer hopes. Her hands were strong from scrubbing floors and carrying water, yet they trembled now as she gathered the empty cup from the small table beside the chair. She kept her eyes lowered, the way she always did, dark lashes hiding thoughts she never spoke. She had not been raised in wealth. Her childhood had followed wagon ruts and campfires, shaped by a mother who sang old songs learned from native women along the river. From them she learned patience, quiet strength, and how to listen to the land. From her father she learned silence after he never returned from a winter hunt. Since then she had survived by staying unseen. The cowboy did not move as she stepped closer. The fire popped softly. Outside, a coyote called, its voice thin and lonely. She hesitated beside him, her fingers tightening around the cloth in her hand. She had been sent to tend the fire and clear the room before bed. That was all. Yet she lingered, her gaze drifting to his face. Up close, the lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting into sun and sorrow. He looked older when he slept, as if the weight he carried settled deeper when he let his guard down. Her breath caught just slightly. She had seen him ride in from storms, bloodied but standing. She had watched him speak gently to frightened children passing through town, giving them food without asking names. She had seen him place flowers on a grave behind the cottonwoods and stand there until the light faded. But she had never been this close. The house creaked as the fire shifted. She flinched, glancing toward the door, then back to him, still asleep. Carefully, she set the cup aside and reached for the blanket folded over the chair. It was a simple thing, but her hand slowed as she lifted it. The room felt too quiet, too full of things unsaid. She draped the blanket over his shoulders, making sure it rested easy against his chest. Her fingers brushed his shirt by accident. She froze. The cowboy felt everything. He kept his breathing even, his body relaxed, but his senses sharpened like a blade. The warmth of her hands lingered longer than the fire. He had noticed her long before this night. Not for beauty alone, though she had a soft strength about her that drew the eye, but for the way she moved through the world without asking anything from it. He waited. The maid pulled her hand back, then surprised herself by placing it gently against his arm again, this time on purpose. Her touch was light, uncertain, as if she expected the moment to vanish. She swallowed and leaned closer, her voice barely more than breath. "You work too hard," she whispered, though no answer could come. Her words struck deeper than gunfire ever had. She straightened, shame flickering across her face, and turned as if to flee, but something held her there. Maybe it was the fire. Maybe it was the way the frontier sometimes forced hearts to speak before courage arrived. Slowly, she reached up and brushed a speck of ash from his cheek. The gesture was tender, almost reverent. Her eyes shone in the firelight, filled with a feeling she had never dared name. That was when she did something that made the cowboy's chest tighten. She bowed her head and rested it against his shoulder, just for a moment. Not for comfort, not for safety, but for honesty. Her eyes closed. In that instant, the test became something else entirely. The cowboy felt his breath hitch, just slightly, and knew he could not keep this silence much longer. The world outside was harsh, and frontier life rarely gave second chances. This was no game now. This was a truth laid bare in firelight and quiet. Before he could decide whether to open his eyes or let the moment pass, she lifted her head, her face pale with sudden fear at what she had allowed herself to do. She stepped back, hands clenched, and whispered an apology that trembled like a leaf in the wind. He remained still, heart pounding, knowing that when morning came, nothing in this old West town would feel quite the same. She fled the room like a deer startled from brush, her steps light but uneven, the hem of her dress whispering against the floor. The door to the back hall closed with care, yet the sound felt loud in the stillness she left behind. Only then did the cowboy allow his breath to change. He opened his eyes and stared into the fire, its glow blurring as memories rose unasked. He had not meant to test her heart. At least that was what he told himself. The truth lay deeper, tangled in old wounds and habits learned the hard way. Out here, a man learned to watch before he trusted. He had trusted once, long ago, when the land was younger to him and the future felt wide as the plains. That trust had been buried beneath a cottonwood, marked by a simple stone and a promise he never kept. He rose from the chair and stood with his hands braced on the mantel, shoulders heavy. The house creaked around him, a sound he had come to know as well as his own breath. It had been built to last, like him, but even strong things carried cracks if you looked close enough. Beyond the walls, the land stretched hard and open. Drought had scarred it more than once. Winters came sharp and unforgiving. Bandits moved through the forgotten trails when the law looked the other way. The old west town a few miles off survived by grit alone. Folks there nodded to him with respect, but they kept their distance. Wealth could buy land and cattle, but it could not buy ease. In the small room at the back of the house, the maid pressed her palms to the wash basin and stared at her reflection in the dark glass. Her face looked thinner than it had a year ago, her eyes older. She had crossed too many miles for someone so young, followed too many broken paths. When she came to this place, she had sworn to keep herself guarded. Work, food, and shelter were enough. Hope was dangerous. Yet hope had found her all the same. She remembered the day she arrived, dust-covered and weary, with only a small bundle to her name. The foreman had looked her over and asked few questions. The cowboy had stood back, silent, his gaze sharp but not unkind. When he spoke, his voice had been low and steady. He offered fair pay and no promises. That alone had felt honest. Since then, she had learned the rhythm of the house. Mornings filled with light and quiet chores. Afternoons where the sun pressed hard and the land seemed to hold its breath. Evenings when the fire became the heart of the place. She had learned when to stay unseen and when her help was needed. She had learned his moods by the way he set his hat down or how long he stood outside before coming in. What she had not learned was how to still her own heart. She had lost her mother to sickness near a river where native women had once shared herbs and stories. She had lost her father to the plains. After that, she learned to move with the seasons, taking work where she could, leaving before attachment grew roots. She had seen what the frontier did to those who hoped too freely, broken families, promises left behind like old wagon wheels. The cowboy carried his own ghosts. He stepped out onto the porch, letting the cool night air bite his skin. The stars were sharp and endless. Somewhere out there lay the place where his life had split in two. He had ridden hard then, chasing cattle and dreams, believing he could outrun loss. When illness came, swift and cruel, he had been days away. By the time he returned, all that remained was silence and a child-sized grave beside the woman he loved. He had not stayed long after that. He built his house later, far from town, far from memory. He filled it with books and fine furniture, things meant to keep the past at bay. He took in workers, paid them well, and kept his distance. It was easier that way, safer, until the maid arrived with her quiet steps and eyes full of unsaid things. Days passed after that night, each one thick with unspoken tension. She avoided him when she could, keeping to the edges of the house. When their paths crossed, her gaze dropped, her words careful and brief. He noticed every change. He noticed the way her shoulders tightened when he entered a room, the way she lingered at doorways as if unsure whether to stay or flee. He did not speak of the night, neither did she. Outside, trouble stirred. Riders were seen near the southern trail, their tracks cut deep and careless. The foreman spoke of cattle gone missing. Town gossip hinted at men who took what they wanted and left fire behind. The land itself seemed uneasy, the wind carrying warnings. One afternoon, the cowboy rode the fence line with a rifle across his saddle. The sun beat down and the grass lay flat and dry. He thought of the maid alone in the house and felt a tightness he did not welcome. Protecting land was simple. Protecting hearts was not. She, too, felt the change in the air. The women in town spoke in low voices when she came for supplies. Some looked at her with pity, others with sharp interest. A maid in a rich man's house drew attention whether she wanted it or not. She kept her head down and her steps quick, aware of the lines she must not cross. That night, as the fire burned low again, their eyes met across the room. It lasted only a moment, but it held more weight than words. The past stood between them, along with fear, distance, and the hard rules of frontier life. Neither knew which would break first. The next morning came pale and cold, the kind of dawn that made the world look honest. Mist clung low to the grass, and the fence posts stood like tired sentries. From the kitchen window, the maid watched the yard while her hands kneaded dough. A hawk circled far off, slow and patient. Somewhere a gate creaked, and the sound made her pause as if she had heard her own name spoken. She told herself she was only watching the weather, but she was listening for hoofbeats. When the cowboy finally rode in from the outer line, his horse lathered and restless, she felt her shoulders loosen before she could stop it. Then she remembered herself and turned back to the stove, cheeks warm with shame. In this house, feelings were a danger. In this country, they were a weakness someone could use. He dismounted near the porch and stood for a moment, scanning the empty yard. His eyes moved the way they always did when he came back from the land, measuring the world for changes. He had seen tracks near the creek, fresh and careless, and the marks of a dragged hoof where a steer had been forced off the trail. Trouble was not a question now. It was simply waiting for the right night. The foreman met him by the barn, face drawn tight. "They're testing the place," the foreman said. "Cattle last week, now this. If we don't answer, they'll come bolder." The cowboy's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "We answer by being ready, not by riding blind into a trap." The foreman spat into the dust. "Town's talking. Says you're too soft these days." Soft, the word landed like an insult and a warning both. Men in town like to explain a quiet man as weakness. They like to think money made a person gentle. They did not know the kind of cold that settled in a man after he had buried what mattered most. "I'll handle my own ranch," the cowboy said, and his tone ended the talk. Yet the foreman's words followed him like a shadow. Town was talking, and town watched everything, especially what it did not understand. Later, when the cowboy stepped into the house, the warmth and smell of bread met him, and for a moment it felt like a memory he could not place. The maid stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, flour on her hands. She did not look up at first. Then she did, quick as a heartbeat, and their eyes caught. He saw fear there, not of him exactly. Fear of herself. He took off his gloves slowly, as if any sudden movement might send her fleeing. "You don't need to bake so much," he said. Her throat worked as she swallowed. "Men work hard. They need food. Men can manage without being spoiled." She almost smiled at that, and the small curve of it struck him harder than it should have. Then she lowered her eyes again, as if she had allowed too much to show. He rested his hat on the peg and kept his distance. "Was anyone in the yard while I was out?" "No," she said. "Just the wind." He nodded. He did not tell her about the tracks. He told himself it was to keep her from worrying. The truth was he did not want to see fear in her eyes tied to something he could not control. That afternoon she went into town with the cook's list and a small basket. The road ran between dry fields and scrub, and the sky looked too wide. Every creak of leather, every distant sound, made her think of riders hiding behind the brush. She had seen trouble before. Once, near a mining camp, she watched men break into a cabin and drag out what they wanted. She had learned then that fear could come quiet like a snake in tall grass. In the old west town, the general store was crowded with talk. Men stood near the stove, boots muddy, voices low. When she stepped inside, the room shifted. Not enough to be open, but enough to sting. She kept her head down and moved to the counter. The storekeeper's wife, a heavy woman with sharp eyes, leaned closer as she wrapped flour. "You hear the news?" she asked. The maid shook her head. "Cattle thieves," the woman whispered, almost pleased. "They say the rich rancher's got trouble. They say he's been hiding behind money and books too long. Maybe this'll teach him." The maid's hands tightened around her basket. "He's not hiding." The woman blinked, surprised by the quickness in her voice. Then she smiled in a way that was not kind. "Careful, girl. A maid speaking up for her master gets tongues wagging. Folks already wonder why he keeps you close in that big, lonely house." Heat rose in the maid's face. "I work, that's all." "Maybe," the woman said. "Or maybe you're hoping for more than work." The words followed her out of the store and down the street. She felt eyes on her back. The town had rules sharper than any knife. A rich man and a poor woman were not meant to look at each other too long, not without someone deciding the story for them. On her way back, she took the longer road near the cottonwoods, hoping to avoid the main trail. The trees stood thin and bare, their branches clicking softly. The air smelled like dry leaves and distant smoke. Then she heard it, hooves, not behind her, but off to the side, half hidden in brush. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She froze, basket clutched to her chest. For a moment she told herself it was only a ranch hand, only a rider passing through. A figure moved between the trees, not showing his full face. She took one slow step back. The rider did not speak, he only watched. Then, as if he had seen enough, he turned his horse and disappeared. She stood shaking, breath caught in her throat, and when she finally moved again, she ran the rest of the way home. When she reached the ranch, the cowboy was in the yard, talking with the foreman. He turned at the sound of her steps, and his expression changed at once. He crossed the distance in long strides. "What happened?" he asked, voice low. "Nothing," she lied, and hated herself for it. He studied her face. "You're pale. It's just the cold." His gaze dropped to her hands. She was gripping the basket hard enough to whiten her knuckles. He reached out as if to take it, and she flinched before she could stop herself. The flinch told him everything. His jaw tightened. "Who did you see?" Her eyes filled, not with tears that fell, but with the shine of them. "Someone on the road? I don't know who." He didn't speak. The foreman's face darkened. "They're getting bold." The cowboy took the basket from her gently, his fingers brushing hers for a brief moment. The touch was steady, warm. It made her chest ache. He leaned closer, voice soft enough that only she could hear. "You should have told me sooner. I didn't want to trouble you," she whispered. He looked at her then, truly looked, and the distance between them felt thin as smoke. "You are not trouble," he said. The words hit her like a promise, and promises were dangerous things in the West. That night, the ranch grew tense. Men doubled their patrols. Lanterns moved along the fence like fireflies. The cowboy cleaned his rifle at the table, movements calm, face unreadable. The maid tried to keep busy, but her hands shook as she washed dishes. At one point, she found herself standing near him, drawn by something she could not name. She watched his fingers work with practiced care. The lamplight caught the hard lines of his face and the softness at the corner of his mouth that he never showed in town. He glanced up, meeting her gaze, and for a moment neither moved. "You're afraid," he said. "Yes," she admitted, because lying felt too heavy now. He set the rifle down and leaned back slightly. "So am I?" That surprised her. Men like him did not confess fear. They carried it like a hidden wound. She swallowed. "Of them?" He hesitated, and in that pause she felt the truth. "Of losing what little piece is left," he said. "Of making the wrong choice." The fire cracked softly. Outside, wind pressed against the windows like fingers trying to get in. She stepped closer without thinking. "You're not alone," she whispered. His eyes held hers. He did not reach for her. He did not close the space. But the air between them felt alive, trembling with something fragile and bright. Then a shout sounded from the yard. Both of them startled. The cowboy's hand went to his rifle. He stood fast, all warmth gone, replaced by hard readiness. He moved to the door, calling for answers. The maid remained frozen by the table, heart racing, knowing that whatever was coming, it was coming closer. And she also knew that the closer danger came, the harder it would be to keep her heart safe from him. The shout outside cut through the house like a knife. Boots pounded across the porch. A lantern swung, throwing wild shadows against the walls. The maid stood rooted to the floor, hands pressed to the edge of the table, as if it were the only steady thing left in the world. The cowboy opened the door and stepped into the night without hesitation. Cold air rushed in behind him, carrying the smell of dust and horse sweat. Men gathered in the yard, faces tight, eyes scanning the dark. "South fence," a ranch hand said, breath sharp. Someone tripped the wire. We saw a light move, and then it vanished. The cowboy's gaze swept the pasture. The moon sat thin behind clouds. The land beyond the fence looked like a sea of black. He did not like unseen things. He did not like how quiet the night had become, as if even the crickets were holding their breath. He turned to the foreman. "Take 2 men and circle wide, no shouting." "No firing unless you have to." The foreman nodded and moved fast. The cowboy started toward the barn, then stopped. He looked back at the house. The maid stood in the doorway now, her face pale in the lantern light, eyes wide and searching. He should have told her to go back inside. He should have ordered her to lock the door and stay hidden. That was the safe thing, the proper thing. But something in her expression made him feel the old fear rise, the one he pretended had died years ago. Fear of being too late. He walked to her, lowering his voice. "Go inside and bar the door." She did not move. "Are they here?" "Not in the yard," he said. "But they're close." Her lips parted as if to speak, then she swallowed the words. He could see the battle in her, the wish to obey and the deeper wish to not be left behind in the dark. She had already lost too many people by being powerless. "I saw a rider," she said suddenly, voice shaking. "On the road. Yesterday, I think he was looking at the house, not at me." The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "How close?" "Close enough I could hear his saddle creak." He cursed under his breath. He had hoped the trouble was only thieves looking for cattle. This sounded like something more planned, more personal. He thought of town gossip, of the way people watched the ranch, of the way danger sometimes wore a familiar face. He thought of the maid's quiet life in this house and how easily it could be torn apart. He wanted to promise her safety. He had learned not to make promises. A rider appeared at the edge of the lantern light. The foreman returned sooner than expected, face set hard. "We found tracks," he said, "more than 2. They're circling, not just stealing. They're testing us." The cowboy's gaze flicked to the maid again. He saw her fear, but he also saw something else, resolve. "I can help," she said. "No," he answered quickly. Her chin lifted a fraction. "I have helped before. I have lived through worse than whispers in the dark." He held her eyes. "This is my ranch, my fight, and I live here," she replied softly. "If they come, it becomes mine too." The words hit him in a place he did not like to admit existed. He had kept this house distant, as if it were only wood and stone. She spoke like it was a home. For a moment he did not know what to say. Another sound came from the far side of the yard. A faint whistle, then a low laugh carried by wind. Men stiffened. The lantern flame wavered. The cowboy stepped forward, voice loud enough for all. "Show yourself." Silence. Then, from beyond the fence line, a voice called back, smooth as oil. "Evening, rancher. Fine night to be awake." The cowboy's blood cooled. He knew that voice. He had not heard it in years, but the past had a way of returning with a cruel smile. A figure emerged slowly into the moon's thin light. He did not ride in. He walked, hands out to his sides as if he meant no harm. His hat was low, coat dark, but when he lifted his face, the cowboy saw the familiar shape of it, the same sharp grin that had once shared whiskey and made false vows. A man from his old life, a man who had known his first family. The maid felt the air change, the ranch hands did too. Trouble had stepped out of shadows and into truth. The cowboy did not move, but his hand tightened around his rifle. His voice came out lower now. "You should not be here." The man chuckled. "That's no welcome for an old friend. I don't have friends like you." The man's smile widened. "Maybe not, but you have something I want." The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "Cattle?" The man shook his head slowly and glanced past him, toward the house. His gaze found the doorway, found the maid. Her stomach dropped. She had never met this man, but she felt the weight of his look like a brand. "You've got a pretty little thing working for you," the man said. The cowboy's voice turned hard. "Keep your eyes off her." The man raised his brows as if amused. "So it's like that? Town's been right then." The maid's cheeks burned, but she did not look away. She refused to shrink. Yet fear crawled through her chest all the same. There was something hungry in the way he spoke, something that made her think of wolves circling a campfire. The cowboy took one step forward, placing himself more fully between her and the man. "Say what you came to say." The man's grin faded a little. "I came for what you owe. You remember, don't you? That debt you left behind." The cowboy's jaw clenched. He remembered. A night in a far town, a desperate bargain, a promise made when grief had hollowed him out. He had thought he could pay it off with money. He had thought distance would end it. It had not. "I paid what was asked," the cowboy said. "You paid part," the man replied. "But the rest wasn't money." The ranch hands shifted, uneasy. The foreman spat into the dirt, eyes narrowed. "What's he talking about?" The cowboy did not answer. His silence said enough. The maid looked from one man to the other, her heart pounding. Whatever this was, it was older than her. It was tied to the cowboy's past, the one he never spoke of. The one that had built the walls around him. The man stepped closer to the fence, voice carrying. "I've been watching you live all quiet and rich. I've been watching you act like you're above the dirt you came from. But a man can't outrun what he did." The cowboy's grip on the rifle tightened until his knuckles showed. The man's eyes gleamed. "I want something that'll hurt. Something you care about." The maid's breath caught. She understood then, clear as sunrise. She was not a stranger in this threat. She was the point of it. The cowboy glanced back at her, and for the first time she saw naked fear on his face. Not fear of bullets or thieves. Fear of losing someone again. Fear of being too late again. He turned sharply to the foreman. "Take the men. Move her to the cellar, now." The maid shook her head before she even thought. "No," his eyes flashed. "Do it." She stepped off the porch and into the yard, stopping beside him. The cold bit through her sleeves, but she held her ground. "If I hide, he wins. If I run, I become a thing to be taken." "I will not live that way." The cowboy's chest rose, heavy. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand plenty," she said, voice trembling but steady. "I understand what it is to be hunted. I understand what it is to lose everything and still wake up alive." The man laughed softly. "Hear that? She's got spirit. I like spirit." The cowboy's head turned, eyes blazing. "Enough." He took a breath, then made a choice that tasted like iron. He lowered the rifle slightly and spoke, voice loud enough to carry past the fence. "You want your debt? Fine, name it." The man's grin returned. "Now we're talking." The cowboy's eyes flicked to the maid one more time. In that glance she felt everything he refused to say. That he had tried to keep her safe by keeping her distant. That he had tried to protect his heart by pretending it was already broken beyond repair. That he had failed. She reached out, barely touching his sleeve with her fingertips. The smallest touch, but it steadied him like a rope in a storm. The man leaned forward. "Come alone at first light. To the old crossing by the cottonwoods. Bring no men, bring no law. If you do, I'll make sure your house burns with everyone inside." A harsh wind swept across the yard. The lantern flame fluttered, almost went out. The cowboy held the man's gaze without blinking. "And if I come?" The man's smile showed teeth. "Maybe you get to keep what you found. Maybe." He stepped back into darkness as if the night swallowed him, and within moments the fence line was empty again, only tracks and silence left behind. The ranch hands began to speak at once, voices angry and afraid. The foreman swore, pacing. Plans were thrown like sparks, hot and useless. The cowboy did not move. He stared into the dark where the man had been, as if he could drag him back with his eyes. The maid watched him and felt her own fear twist into something stronger. She had wanted love to feel gentle. Out here, love was bound up with danger and sacrifice. Love meant standing in the open when the night wanted you to hide. He finally turned to her, and his voice broke in a way she had never heard. "If I go, I may not come back." Her throat tightened. "If you do not go, he will come here." He swallowed hard as if the words tasted like grief. "I won't lose another." The maid lifted her chin, forcing breath into her lungs. Then do not leave me behind in silence. Tell me the truth. Tell me what this debt is. Tell me who he is. The cowboy stared at her, eyes shining with old pain, and for a moment it looked like he might finally open the locked door inside him. Then another distant whistle sounded from the far fields, followed by a flash of movement near the barn. The foreman shouted, "Riders!" Everything exploded into motion. The cowboy spun, rifle up, scanning the darkness. Men ran to posts. Horses screamed in the barn. The maid stood frozen, the world tilting under her feet. In the black beyond the lantern light, shapes moved fast, circling, closing. And the cowboy, caught between his past and the fragile hope standing beside him, faced the night like a man about to lose everything again. The riders came like a shadowed wave, splitting in two as they hit the edge of lantern light. Hooves thudded hard in the dirt. A horse screamed again, high and terrified. For a moment the yard turned into moving darkness and sharp breath. Men shouting names and directions, lanterns swinging like frightened stars. The cowboy lifted his rifle and fired one shot into the air. The crack split the night and the riders checked, startled, just long enough for the ranch hands to take positions behind barrels and posts. The foreman yelled for the barn doors to be barred. Another ranch hand dragged a wagon across the open space, making a poor wall, but a wall all the same. The maid stood on the porch steps, frozen until the cowboy shouted her name, sharp as a whip. Inside, now. This time she obeyed, not because fear won, but because she saw his face. He was not only fighting thieves. He was fighting the past that kept trying to steal what was left of him. If she stayed in the open, she would become the knife in his ribs. She rushed inside and slammed the door, hands trembling as she slid the bar into place. Her chest heaved. Through the window she saw figures on horseback circling, heard low laughter and the hard scrape of boots against dirt. Then she heard the voice again, carrying over the yard, smooth and cruel. "Rancher," it called. "You got yourself a fine little army." The cowboy stepped forward into the lantern light, shoulders squared. "You made your point. Now leave." The man's laugh came from the dark. "Not yet." The cowboy's gaze flicked over the riders, counting. He saw them shifting, trying to draw him out. He saw a small glint near one saddle, the shine of a bottle swinging from a strap, and it hit him like a memory he hated. A bottle. He understood then what this was truly about. Years ago, when grief had turned his throat dry and his mind cruel, he had ridden into a rough town and tried to drink the world quiet. That was where he met this man, smiling like a friend, offering a way to end the ache. There had been a girl then too, young and scared, traded by a desperate parent for a few dollars and a bottle. The cowboy had stopped it, not with violence, but with money and fury, paying double, telling the man he would not allow it. He had taken the girl to safety. He had thought he had ended it. But he had made a bargain in that moment. He had promised the wrong man something he could not deliver, a favor. A door opened, a piece of his wealth, anything later when the man asked. The cowboy had believed time would erase the promise. Time had only sharpened it. Outside, one rider spurred forward, swinging a rope. It snapped through the air and caught a ranch hand's shoulder, yanking him hard. The foreman shouted and two men grabbed the rope, hauling back, turning it into a tug that pulled horse and man closer to the lantern light. The rider cursed and cut the rope loose, retreating. The cowboy raised his rifle again, but he did not fire at flesh. He aimed at the ground near the rider's horse and sent dirt flying. The horse reared and bolted, dragging its rider away in panic. "Back!" the cowboy roared. "You want me. You come for me. Leave my people out of it." The rider shifted, uncertain. They expected a rich man to hide behind his men. They did not expect him to stand in the open and draw the threat to himself. A figure stepped out from the darkness near the fence line, slow and confident. The man from the past. He carried no rifle, only a pistol loose at his hip, as if he did not need it yet. He tipped his hat. Still trying to be righteous, the cowboy's voice came low. "You were never owed anything," the man's eyes gleamed. "I was owed my way. You stopped me once. You shamed me. I've carried that burn a long time." The cowboy's jaw clenched. "Then take it out on me and be done." "Oh, I will," the man said, and his gaze slid toward the house. "But first I want what I came for." The maid pressed her face to the window, heart hammering. She saw the cowboy take a step as if to block the man's sight. She saw how the man smiled wider, like he had found the soft spot at last. The man's voice lifted. "Girl in there, come out. No one gets hurt if you come out." The maid's hands shook on the window frame. Every part of her wanted to stay hidden. Every memory of being powerless screamed at her to disappear. Then she heard the cowboy's voice, rough and breaking, calling toward the house. "Don't." The word held more than command. It held fear. It held love that had been denied a name. She stepped away from the window and closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw her mother's tired smile, the way she had once said a person could survive anything but a life lived in chains. She thought of the town's sharp tongues and the rules that said she should not matter. She thought of the cowboy's silence and the way his eyes softened when he thought no one noticed. She took a breath and made her own choice. She opened the back door instead of the front. She slipped out into the darkness behind the house and moved along the wall, keeping low. The night was cold and thick, but she knew this land now. She had walked it in daylight, learned where the boards creaked on the porch, where the shadows fell thickest. She moved like she had been taught as a child along river trails, quiet as a prayer. Near the woodpile, she saw it. The old bell rope that hung beside the cellar door used to signal men working far out on the field. The rope ran up to a small iron bell mounted under the eaves, loud enough to wake the dead if pulled hard. She wrapped her hand around it. In the yard, the man from the past stepped forward again, voice sharp now. "Last chance, rancher. You come alone at first light, or I take what I want tonight." The cowboy's eyes burned. "You step 1 foot closer to that house and I swear." "You swear what?" the man sneered. "You won't shoot, you're too proud." "Too clean." The cowboy's hand trembled once, almost unseen. The man had guessed right. He had a code carved from grief. He would not spill blood unless forced, and the man was counting on that. The maid yanked the rope. The bell exploded into sound, harsh and sudden, ringing across the ranch like thunder. Horses jolted, riders cursed, ranch hands snapped their heads toward the house, startled by the signal. The cowboy understood at once. He saw the chance in the confusion. He shouted, "Now, move!" Men surged forward from cover, not firing wildly but rushing in a tight pack. The foreman swung a lantern up and hurled it toward the ground near the riders, the flame bursting bright and shocking in the dark. Horses shied, backing away. The man from the past spun, furious, searching for the source of the bell. His eyes went to the back of the house. And there she was, stepping into the edge of moonlight, one hand still on the rope. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The man's face twisted. "You little—" He lunged toward her, but the cowboy was faster. The cowboy crossed the yard in a rush that looked like pure instinct. He grabbed the man's arm before the pistol could be drawn and slammed him hard against a post. The man struggled, teeth bared, but the cowboy held him like iron. "Enough!" the cowboy growled. The man spat. "You think you won? You think you can keep her? Town will tear her apart. They'll call her names. They'll say she climbed into your bed for money." The cowboy's grip tightened. His voice dropped, quiet and deadly. "Let them talk," the man laughed, but it sounded cracked now. "You're willing to ruin yourself for her?" The cowboy hesitated, and the maid saw the fight in him, the old wound, the fear of loving again, the dread of losing what he loved. Then he looked at her. Not at the maid who worked his house, at the woman who had rung the bell and stood in the open anyway. His face softened in the lantern light. "I've been ruined before," he said. "This time I'd rather be ruined by truth." The foreman and 2 ranch hands grabbed the man and pulled him back, wrenching the pistol from his belt. Other riders, seeing their leader caught and the ranch hands rushing, turned and fled into the dark, their hooves fading fast. The yard fell quiet except for the bell's last tremble and the horses' uneasy snorts. Smoke drifted from the broken lantern flame, and the night air smelled of burned oil and dry fear. The cowboy stood breathing hard, hands shaking now that the danger had passed. He turned slowly toward the maid. She expected anger. She expected a command. She expected the walls to rise again. Instead, he walked to her and stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold night. His eyes shone with something she had never seen there before, relief mixed with sorrow. and a fierce tenderness that frightened her more than the riders had. "You should not have come out," he said, but his voice was not harsh. It was broken with feeling. She swallowed. "You would have gone alone at first light." He did not deny it. "I could not let you," she whispered. He stared at her as if searching for the right words in a place he had not visited in years. "I pretended to sleep," he admitted quietly, "because I wanted to know if your kindness was real or only duty. I was a fool." Her eyes filled. "You were afraid?" "Yes," he said. "Afraid that if I reached for anything good, it would be taken away again." She lifted her chin. "And I was afraid that if I cared, I would be cast aside like all the other things the West forgets." For a long moment they stood in the yard, lantern light flickering over them, the ranch behind them breathing steady again. The foreman looked away, giving them space, and the men dragged the captured troublemaker toward the barn to be held until sunrise and law could take him. The cowboy reached out slowly, as if asking permission, and brushed his fingers against her cheek, wiping a streak of soot he did not remember her earning. His touch was gentle, careful, like something precious. "You're not forgotten," he said. "Not by me." She closed her eyes, leaning into his hand for a brief moment, and it felt like stepping into warmth after a long winter. The next days brought hard work and hard truths. The law came from town and took the man away in irons. The cattle theft stopped. The ranch hands walked with easier shoulders. The foreman stopped calling the cowboy soft and began calling him steady. Town did what towns did. Words traveled. Some were sharp, some were cruel. But there were also quieter voices, women who saw the Maid's strength, men who respected the cowboy's calm courage. The West could be harsh, but it could also learn slowly, like land healing after fire. One evening, weeks later, the fire burned low in the same room where the test had begun. The cowboy sat in the wide chair, not sleeping, not pretending. The Maid stood beside him with a cup of coffee, her hands steady now. Outside, the wind moved across the grass and the stars watched over the forgotten trails. He took her hand openly, not hidden, not ashamed. She sat on the arm of the chair, resting her head against his shoulder as if it had always belonged there. "We survived," she whispered. He nodded, his voice quiet. "And we will keep surviving." But not alone. The fire crackled. The house creaked softly, not with loneliness now, but with the slow settling of something that had finally found its place. Out on the plains, night still came early. The frontier was still wild. But inside that room, warmth held steady and hope,